Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns, the 2020 Mastery Mission. 20 topics, 20 guests, 20 minutes. We're here to unlock the tribal wisdom from the legends of tech sales to help you get one step closer to mastery. I'm Simon KOUTTIS and I'm joined by my co-host, OLLIE KUEHNE.
Welcome back to the show, everyone.
And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Bernd Maehrlein. Bernd, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here, finally.
Amazing. It's been some time. We've made this promise and it's finally happening. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today, Bernd.
Awesome. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, in the way of an introduction, you're currently Regional Vice President, Central and Eastern Europe at Lacework. Absolute rocket ship. You guys are absolutely killing it right now, making so much noise. But I suppose what's interesting is your background before that. You were first man on the ground, Cybereason, where you essentially helped to build out the DACH region, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and also stints at MongoDB. So, very, very much indoctrinated within the playbook community. So, Bernd, we have 20 minutes together today. Could you please introduce your topic?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we discussed a bunch of topics. The one we landed on was being first man on the ground. Like, how does it actually feel to be the first man, and how do you choose whether you want to do that as a rep or as somebody who's potentially managed teams before? And that's really it. Yeah.
Amazing. And why is it that we chose this topic, Bernd? Why do you think it's so important?
Well, I think from a rep's perspective, any career decision is insanely important because you're going to be spending so much time on it, no matter what you do. But specifically, if you choose to be first man for typically US or Israeli companies, or any company really, in a region, you're going to be the first face and you're going to be doing everything in the beginning. So you're probably going to be working a little bit. So you better make sure you make that decision wisely and basically consider everything that goes into it in terms of you really wanting to do that job for the right reasons, knowing your why behind it. And yeah, that's probably it. And I just don't think there's so many people who really truly enjoy this. So I think it's worth discussing the ins and outs of it to find out whether that can be something for listeners or not. At least that's my impression.
So, as someone that's obviously been first man on the ground, when you actually go into first man on the ground, there's obviously lots of things that you're assessing. But from what you've learned about what it takes to build a region, when there is nothing, how do you now assess what a good first person opportunity might look like?
Okay, so I think one thing that's very important is who's the ideal customer, and that's something that I've learned a bunch from Andy, from John, and all the guys. Just making sure you really understand who you want to go after, and then find out whether that's defined at a company level. Depending on where the company is at, like what series they're at in terms of funding and all of that, and maturity, and find out whether there's some sort or a pretty defined ideal customer profile. Then the thing I would do is to look at whether that ideal customer profile exists in the region and whether you're confident that the way that these people buy work with the way that the company thinks they're going to be selling in region. Because I mean, the first thing you ideally do is you replicate what works elsewhere. To me, it doesn't really make sense to come in and try to reinvent the wheel and everything and act like you know it all, because you probably don't when other people have done it in other regions successfully.
Yeah, sure. That's obviously incredibly insightful. So let's make the transition. We are now the first person in the region. You talk a lot about building plans, and you talk about having an evolving plan rather than a fixed plan. So tell us a little bit about the three evolving steps of your plan, Bernd.
Yeah, so when you first start, one of the key things is you're always going to be short on time, and you're always gonna feel like you're not doing enough of this or that. From my point of view, it's a mixture of planning and execution. And the way that I like to explain it to people, like when I'm in interviews or when we have conversations, the way I feel, it's usually on the left side, you roll up your sleeve and you get stuff done. On your right hand, you have a pen in your hand and you actually write the plan, ideally a little bit before you start doing it, but then as you go and reiterate and make that work. So it obviously needs to be revised to the situations that you find yourself. back to the point from before, you're going to have a plan that you would have built up to try to find out whether you actually want to do it. Then you get in, you realize what the situation is, you adapt to that, and you need to be good at communicating what you're planning to do internally and externally. So you might as well have some kind of structure to yourself so that you can articulate that. Yeah, we've talked about the ICP topic in a second. So one thing that's important is not to put your energy into companies that are going to take a very, very long time to actually work with you. I'm not saying every company with every solution going into a market should sell to a small startup, because that's quicker. But if you start with the VWs, the Daimlers, the Siemenses of this world in Germany, and you expect to land first customers in a certain amount of time, it's going to be really, really hard. So know where to put your energy first and where you can win and spend your time. Also, one thing that's really, really crucial is to understand that market. So be an expert, or get to be an expert. Find the resources internally with your company. It's probably there somewhere to really, really understand the details of the technology and the value this brings to prospective customers and existing customers. Understand current customer stories. By that, I don't just mean a one-page marketing sheet that you read through, but talk to the people that close those deals. Try to find out the details. How did they find this deal? How did they generate it? How did this then evolve into a deal? How long did it take? Who was the champion or champions in this account? Who was typically the EB? Like, through these conversations, you're going to understand how this can work. And you're going to have to be somewhat of an expert, because you're going to be the brand of this company in region, and people will have to trust you. And if they have a first conversation with you, be it prospects, channel partners, or whatever else in the ecosystem, or anyone you're trying to hire, they're going to have to feel that you understood why things are a certain way and how you can positively influence them as a company.
Bernd, how much of this validation process that we're talking about here is confirmed through the interview stage? And do you confirm it at that interview stage, or your discovery stage on the opportunity itself?
The more the better. And I, as a hiring manager, try to be extremely transparent, and everyone that I've met in this company here right now is the same way. So making sure that the other side really understands the reality of the situation, and we don't sugarcoat anything, and people know what they're up against. So to flip that, if you think about an opportunity like that, I think very similar to qualifying any business opportunity and something to put into your forecast and commit, or put into your best case. It's about really asking the questions and going deep. And the best candidates that I spoke to challenged me a lot on a lot of topics, asked really good, insightful questions, and made me learn through that. So that in the recruiting or hiring process, both sides actually learn from these recruiting conversations. And I would say, if you're recruiting for a first man on the ground as a company, and as a hiring manager for that, maybe you're the VP EMEA or the GM or whatever, and you're hiring for a first man in a region, you're going to want to learn so much from these hiring conversations, and through that really judge what you as a company potentially have to do to win in that market. Because initially, you think about different regions and you look at the economic potential of these regions, and then you might think, oh, Germany's awesome because it's got such a big economy. But potentially there are certain things that are different that you just don't know because you haven't sold in that market. So I think it's also a learning opportunity for the company. But as the person qualifying the job, I think you should go really, really deep. And it comes back to what I said before. Ask to be introduced to many people if they don't do that automatically. Make sure that you speak to 5, 6, 7, 8 different people. Your hiring manager multiple times. I think a best practice is a first 30-minute conversation, a follow-on hour conversation at least, to make sure that after this hour and a half, you have understood the basics and you got a good gut feel on the person. And then after that, I would go and try to find other people that I want to speak to, unless I'm offered that already. And again, it should be done in a pretty short time frame. I would also press at at the earliest convenience, when both sides take this very serious, to meet in person. I mean, by now the world is open again, which is great. And I certainly make sure that I meet people who I partner with in person, and it makes a difference. You get a different feel for people. They get to experience you as you are, unless you have your gut up and try to tell stories. But in the end, that works really, really well, and I would ask for that really early. And then I think a mixture of your gut feel for this opportunity and the work that you would have done and the information that you would have qualified and the plan that you would have put together for this opportunity is going to give you a very clear yes or no on whether you really want to do it. Yeah, I'd leave it there.
Yeah, and when it comes to disruptive technology that's new, that there isn't necessarily in region where you don't necessarily have an ecosystem, whether it's the channel that is supporting that particular technology because it doesn't exist, or you don't know where your EBs are, you don't know who your champions are, and you've not necessarily got those people within your customer set. How do you start to unfold all of that?
You mean how do you build something from nothing, and how do you know where to go?
How do you get the I suppose the reassurance that it's a good opportunity and it's ready, or it's it's the right technology at the right time?
Yeah. So something that's worked for me is to talk to people in my network, not necessarily people from this company or this specific industry if I don't have anyone in that industry, but simply people that I perceive as very knowledgeable, certainly much more knowledgeable than me in topics. Lots of them also technically savvy and really understand how things intertwine and why they're relevant, and trying to get their perspective on it. So, for example, when choosing the last opportunity that I'm now in, I had thorough conversations with former champions of mine in CISO roles and in technical roles to make sure what they perceive, like what's their view of the company. And at that time, they probably don't know the company, but they kind of understand. I can message to them how I understood it. They can do some research and play back to me how they think about it. And that way, like when putting together my plan, it has some reality into it, or at least perceptions from people that are in your market and understand things a bit more, a bit better than you. So I would always encourage that. If you certainly don't have anyone in your network, when you've sold something completely different and never interacted with anyone, I don't know, go on LinkedIn, find people that look interesting in your region and actually PG into them, to have a conversation and actually ask them for an opinion. People tend to help if they can, and if they look like they would be an interesting counterpart, just approach them.
I think on that, you just made a really interesting point there. There's many people that perceive what a startup environment might be like, especially when you are first person on the ground. But what is it that you think most people struggle with in terms of the reality versus actually, what they perceive? Is there a common challenge or something which you notice, come up again and again?
Constant change. If you grow in a very crazy way, as some companies do, by that I mean going from 50 people to 200 in a few months, or going from 200 people to 1,000 like Lacework did last year. Really, there is so much change, and probably you're not used to that from wherever you come from. At some point, it's the first man opportunity or first startup opportunity that you choose to go after, and you think like, this is great. It's a sexy opportunity. It looks interesting. It's a great company, and I want to do this. And then you realize this is actually pretty hard, and also things just change constantly. By that I mean, you start reporting to someone, then the structure changes and there's a different management layer, or the geos are cut up in a different way. Suddenly you report to somebody differently. Not that that's a great way to do things, but stuff like that happens. And then I think one thing is you need to be comfortable to realize certain things that you can change and other things that you cannot change, and be very good at this very moment where you realize you cannot change it, simply put a check mark behind it and leave it to the side and make sure it doesn't emotionally get a hold of you in any way. And you focus on the things you can influence, but on those ones, it's around extreme urgency and extreme ownership. So I don't think everyone is very used to extreme ownership in the definition of, if you don't do it, nobody does it in any way, and it just doesn't get done. And you can always feel in your evenings, or however you reflect when you do your sports or when you spend time with your family, you can always feel like you're not doing enough and you should do this and you should do that. And you need to get comfortable that in theory it's never enough, and there's always things that you should be doing and owning to get stuff done. So I think that's the thing to get comfortable with. And yeah, a lot of the things that we talked about already.
Obviously, Bernd, there's expectations, right? First man on the ground, there's going to be an expectation for you to be doing deals, for you to be able to prove that region. What is the dynamic that somebody needs to take into consideration, and how do you manage those expectations? And can you give us a bit of insight into, I suppose, the pressures put on individuals like you that are then the first man on the ground?
Yeah, certainly. So I think in the beginning it's important to qualify expectations beforehand. So talk to the people that you speak to, and again, multiple people in the chain, to understand whether there are clear expectations, and then what exactly they are, and whether they're aligned between the different stakeholders in the business and whether that fits together. It isn't always the case. If it's not, call it out, talk about it, so that you're just very transparent upfront and you have some kind of a social contract with one another of what you actually want to achieve. Again, that's going to change. It's not going to be in a way where, yeah, but we discussed this in our interview process and now it's changed and now I'm not doing it anymore. That this certainly doesn't work, back to my constant change point from before, but have something to mutually agree on before you start. Now, when you start it, it's around really balancing and making sure that you manage expectations internally. Once you figured out who your ideal customer profile is in region and who you go after, ideally the same ideal customer profile that it is in other regions, replicating this in your region, but that doesn't always work. But typically that's what you should be doing in my experience. And then from then on, making sure that you qualify with prospective customers how this can really work out. And what I mean by that is qualify in and out of opportunities quickly. For that to happen, you're going to have to do pipeline generation and find things directly and potentially through channel partners and different means, and get into these conversations. Because only then you'll have anything real to talk about. Only then you would have understood, am I able to find pain? Am I able to build champions and identify people that really care about that pain? Do I find a way to identify who's the EB on this discussion in my region typically? Who's the person? And can I get to that person through my champion or other means fairly quickly? And then what's a realistic time I need to close those deals? Like, is this realistically done in 2 months from first conversation? Does it take 3? Does it take 6? What's my best guess in the beginning to then play back to your organization what to expect? Obviously, you've got quotas, you've got a number, and you have to hit that number, whichever way. But in the process, I would always advise to just be extremely transparent about where you are, and not only talk about all the great things that you've done and kind of put in Slack, oh, I've done this and we've done that, and the team, but also just be very upfront about what's not working. What are the things that you tried and what's failing? And what do you suggest that you yourself, the team, whoever can influence does differently in order to get to that number? So again, I think it comes down very much to open and honest conversation, mask down and telling people as it is, and not trying to masquerade a situation.
With regards to the plan of action when it comes to who you're going to focus on, the types of customers. Obviously, you speak about ideal customer profiles, right? And when you take a large enterprise product to market, you're going to be going after large enterprise customers. Obviously, with that in markets, there's also mid-market customers, which sales process can be far shorter. Is it advisable, and do you have any advice around kind of the customers that you go after? Is doing some deals with smaller mid-enterprise customers better than putting all your eggs in one basket and just going for that big strategical wins?
I would certainly say going after big enterprise customers only is a lot harder. And if you choose to work for a company that has a solution that only works for very large enterprise, you're just going to have to be conscious about it all around the table. Everyone that wants to build this needs to understand, well, if you're selling to a large bank in Germany, it's just going to take longer. Same thing with large manufacturers and so on and so forth. That said, I think if you can choose as an IC or as a rep or as somebody who's managed elsewhere to go into a startup opportunity, it's definitely beneficial for you if there is a path to also sell this product and drive value in smaller companies. And it doesn't always just have to be smaller amounts of people in terms of employees in this company, but mindset. How does this company think? How do these companies typically interact? What areas are they in? What's driving business value for them? Like what are the business challenges that they have in terms of, are they trying to potentially sell to large customers themselves for some reason and have compliance topics that they need to sort out? Do they have, let's say, a massive competitive setup where they need to develop new product with great technology and they have to secure that for some way? There's so many different angles to look at it, but ideally you identify a market where you can move rather quickly if you find strong champions and access to the EB and find pain. Like if you have all these things in a very large enterprise compared to a mid-market company, or even a startup or a scale-up that you sell to. Because depending on what your license model is in the end, it's not always per seat or per employee. So obviously understand how you can scale that commercially. And then in my experience, you can sell a decent sized deal that people really care about and celebrate and are happy about in a 100 people company or in a 500 people company. And with that, you typically have a structure where you need one champion that's really strong. You have certainly an easier way to get to an EB and really ask for that conversation early in the process. And you can ask very direct questions on how this typically works. And if there is no process for buying and RFPs and all of that, you can help your champion define that buying process and be really, really deeply involved into that, steering it to your benefit, but also to the customer's benefit. Typically, they learn from the interaction they have with you. That's how it should feel with them in the right way. And then that's why I'd say, summarizing, I would always try to find an opportunity where I can also sell into smaller companies, and smaller can have a lot of different meanings depending on what you sell.
So I think this is a really good time to kind of just summarize some of the kind of key actions and key takeaways. Obviously, this episode's been so insightful because there are so many things. So if we were to just take kind of some key things for our listeners to try and really to do following, listening or watching this episode today, what would they be?
So from my perspective, evaluate whether a first man on the ground opportunity is for you. And it's not anything that you have to do, and that's insanely special, and that's why this is something that you have to do in your career. I think it's around, do you enjoy the process of doing that versus the result of you having been a first man? So do you really enjoy this building process? And that's something that I'm very passionate about for myself. So I think find that out and only do it if that's the case and you're interested in the topic. Do your due diligence beforehand. Spend a lot of time qualifying on all the levels that are important. Once you get into it, make sure you communicate clearly, internally and externally. Know your stuff, understand the product, understand the value proposition. Go find your first champions and your first customers really early. Typically, you do this in smaller companies when it works with the product. Go after the low-hanging fruit and qualify in and out really early, because no matter what homework you do, you're not going to land at the perfect company immediately. You're going to have multiple conversations. It's a little bit like cold calling. You're not going to land at the perfect EB right now and he's going to buy. It is a process. So you're going to have to consciously qualify in and out really early, in a way that the customer doesn't feel let down, but in a way that you're open with the customer and say, let's actually talk about this in 6 months for this and that reason. And then you come back and you build this back in 6 months. And then in the end, get really comfortable with the constant change that you're going to have. One, with the change that you're going to introduce, because through this job in itself, you're going to change things constantly, and you're going to have to get your team to adjust to that and hire people who want that and thrive in that environment. And then get used to the same thing in your organization. Maybe you're hired as the first person in Europe or the first person in a country, and there's going to be structure. Like if you do your job well, if the company grows well, there's going to be massive change all around you, different layers of management, potentially a product pivot of some sort, maybe a license change, license model change, whatever it may be. There's so many things that you can think of. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, as people say in this, and don't emotionally worry about anything that you cannot change, and focus on the things that you know you do well. And just be very open-minded in terms of learning, because most likely you're not going to know at least 70% of the stuff that you have to do when you come in. And you have to be really good at picking up the skill set quickly and finding sources for that skill set internally and externally to help you do what you need to get done. That's how I would summarize.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And I think it's a very, very, very insightful summary, and lots of kind of really good takeaways there. So this is the point where we really just summarize what we've obviously spoken about today. In a world today where there's more VC money than there is, possibly sense, there's lots of patches of greenfield that can really attract people. The grass is greener on the other side. And I think one of the important things, to really take from this is that people do need to take the time to really, really inquire to themselves as to whether or not they're attracted by the work to be done or the outcome. Because if you're chasing the outcome, the reality is going to be very, very different to that. And I think you've given some amazing advice around what to do prior to taking an opportunity, but also what to do once you are that first person on the ground, and the reality of that. So Bernd, just want to say a massive thank you to you for your time today. Lots and lots of takeaways. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and your time with us.
Thanks to you guys. Thanks for organizing this. And I've learned so much from the sessions you've had with many other people. And I'm actually very thankful for the service that you're giving to the community. I think people can take a lot from it. And if there's anything that I can add to that, I'm very happy to do that. It was a pleasure. It's always fun to speak to you guys, which is a lot easier in terms of having such conversations than if you speak to people that you actually don't want to be around. Same thing with what I just talked about in the session. So thank you very much for all you do.
Thank you, Bernd. That's really nice of you to say that. And it's been an absolute pleasure. We've known each other for a while, and it's great to have got you on the show. So many inspirational, conversations that we've had. And I also know the impact that you're having in your region and the people that work within your team. So, I just wish you continued success in continuing to build, something so special, and in your career. So, thank you so much for joining us. But to all of our guests, thank you so much. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do hope you've enjoyed this session. If you've liked what you've heard, please do subscribe and share. But again, a massive thank you for Bernd for joining us today on this show, and we look forward to welcoming you all back for another master session soon. Thank you.